Humans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today, I want to do a cool little discussion video talking about MAXX C. Now, there's plenty of differences between the OCG and the TCG. The biggest ones are like the ban list differences and probably the fact that they're a couple months ahead of us at any given time in terms of like products and stuff. But the single most impactful thing that I think is the biggest difference is MAXX C. This is a huge hand trap that, like, we have Ash and everybody plays Ash at 3 in the TCG. But Ash is like a one-off card that stops one thing, and it's a lower impact but consistent hand trap, whereas this card just ends turns, and this is in every single main deck at 3, basically, if you're a competitive player in the OCG. And it's crazy. So it warps a lot of things, and I think one of the biggest things that kind of gets swept under the rug sometimes are decks that are almost non-existent in the TCG's metagame, and they're actually quite good in the TCG because we don't have MAXX C, and MAXX C just decimates them for the OCG's side of things. So today I want to go through and I want to talk about a couple of actually upcoming decks that are either getting support or getting their first printing. I have 3 different decks upcoming that I think are really interesting because I think they're kind of being like underplayed right now. And basically what I mean by that is when people look at the OCG metagame report and they see that these decks are just doing okay to like almost not appearing at all, they go, oh, they're not that good. Like, the OCG is just us a couple months ahead, but they don't factor in that MAXX C just like decimates those decks and just erases them from being like playable for them. So I actually think these 3 decks are a decent bit significantly better, are going to be better in the TCG than in the OCG. So just a couple of examples just that we already have in the TCG. Manadium like does not exist in the OCG. It's just a combo deck that wants to summon a bunch. Can't deal with MAXX C, right? Dark World already struggles in our format just because of Droll and Nib and stuff, those higher impact hand traps. For them, they just have a 3rd big impact hand trap that this deck also can't beat because you're going to give your opponent a million draws. Sun Avalon, this is a deck that just makes a ton of Link 1 super early in their combos, so you just give your opponent like a bunch of draws, and it struggles when they draw into other hand traps because that's this deck's biggest weakness. Doesn't perform well either. And then Unchained. Like, Unchained, there was an argument for like a good period of time. Unchained was like literally the best deck in the format for the TCG pretty recently. And this deck, I don't know if I ever saw this deck get more than like 3 tops on a metagame report, which is insane. For a metagame report that had like over 200 things, I think there was 1 Unchained, and they still have Unchained at full power. I think Unchained with 1 Shavara, with our new ban list, is still going to perform better in the TCG than the OCG. It's crazy, and I think it's MAXX C based. Or at least that's not that it's the entire factor, the entire equation, but I think that's the biggest cause to a lot of these decks struggling. Which brings us to our 3 interesting decks that are right around the corner that I'm very excited to get because I think they're being underplayed a little bit. And maybe this video raises some hype for them, but, you know, I'm not afraid to send it out there. The first one is Ritual Beast. Now, I actually have a sneaky suspicion. I almost want to do an entirely different video for Ritual Beast just to kind of get this out there. I think Ritual Beast has a chance to replace Fluanderies. Now, I'm not sure if it will, because I think part of the reason a lot of players like Fluanderies is like they want to play a competitive deck, but it's very simple. The lines are super linear, and so some players really like that aspect of it. It's like it feels like a stunny deck, and it does some plays, but its lines are super basic. This deck is much harder to play, and so there's a much bigger skill gap. But I think in terms of like, I think it just power creeps Flu though. Like, Flu doesn't really care about Nib that much. That's the one thing that is in the TCG that's going to affect this deck, but the reason this deck is doing so mid in the OCG right now is probably partially because of the skill gap, but also because MAXX C is brutal. This deck is all about just looping Ulti Cannahawk as many times as you can in a turn, and that's a ton of special summons. So they're just basically cutting you off of those, which isn't great with MAXX C. So I think this is going to perform pretty well in this form in the TCG format if there's enough players that are willing to jump on the train, because I think if you're willing to jump on the train, it's just the new better Shifter deck. You also get to play Crossout Designator in the main, which is insane, as well as Shifter. You could even play some of the other macro Floodgates, and the deck has 1 card combos, so the consistency, even you could argue, is going to be better now in this deck than it is in Flu anyway. So really, really interesting deck. I think it's being really slept on because I'm not seeing really many people at all talk about this in terms of competitively. Now, I don't think it's insane, but like also Flu right now isn't insane. It's like that deck that you have to be weary of that you could face one of in any given tournament, but I think this deck could potentially jump in there as that type of deck as well, and plus people hate Shifter, so just be wary that another Shifter deck could be right around the corner and pretty playable if enough people are into the play style. Second option, Goblin Bikers. Really, really cool deck. This deck's getting its first printing in Phantom Nightmare, and it's cool. It's a new Exceed deck. It has some really powerful cards, specifically the Stratos, the Rhoda Spell, and the Rank 3, which are like the main 3 engine cards. They're all quite crazy. But yeah, I think this is another deck where I don't think we've seen like maybe we've seen one top of this deck, but also that might have been on weekend release where a lot of players they played against didn't even know what anything in the deck did, and so they got a free top out of it, which happens. But you know, you can't take that at face value, right? And I think it's just one of those decks struggles against MAXX C, and so it's doing almost nothing in the OCG. Now, I do want to preface this by saying I don't think this deck is going to be like amazing in the TCG, but I think it could be better. I think we'd see a couple people top regionals in the TCG with this, and it's one of those decks. It feels like it's one little wave away of like a good card. This is part of the Sinful Spoils lore. So we saw Diabels, we saw the Snake Eye engine get Populous in their second wave, which is like one of the best support cards we've seen in years. If this deck gets a card akin to that in terms of like how good that card is for their engine, then maybe this deck actually could be a legit a good deck going forward, which is really exciting. And the last deck I want to mention here is Ice Barrier. This deck I know is under the radar by a lot of people. In the OCG, I think it has 4 tops, which is actually more than I almost would have guessed. But because of Mirror Master being one of their new cards, they do struggle with MAXX C. This card summons 3 tokens, and then you try to go Synchro Summon again. So just this card is probably representing 6 summons into MAXX C, which is terrible. So you just can't do a ton of stuff in this deck versus MAXX C. You can do some simple stuff sometimes, but even then you're probably summoning like multiple times just to even get there. And it struggles. So I'm really excited for this deck in the TCG because I think this deck actually has legit potential. I don't know if I'd go as far to say like legit tier 1 potential, but this deck handles almost every other hand trap really well. It can set up in a gate before searching its first search in a lot of cases, which stops Droll. Before the 5th summon, obviously, so stops Nib. And then a lot of the weenie hand traps, this deck just has pretty good extenders, so you can just play through a lot of the weenie extenders, and then you just beat the big ones that aren't MAXX C, which is huge. So I actually think this deck could be legitimately scary in the metagame going forward. Now, we don't know when these 2 archetypes are getting their support, Ritual Beasts and Ice Barriers, but man, if it's like sooner rather than later, and we don't get like any weird power creep in between then, these decks could be pretty interesting for the metagame, for sure. So yeah, that's basically it. These are the 3 super interesting decks that I think like right now are being underplayed a little bit in the OCG, because a lot of people just go to the OCG Road to the King things, they see what's coming, they see what decks are performing really well, and they just go, oh, okay, let me test that. Let me do that. Like, let me test Fire King with the new Snake Eye cards. Let me test Pure Snake Eye, whatever. And they don't even look at like these decks because they don't even like stop and think for a second like, oh, maybe this deck is just straight up better than the OCG is making it look because of no MAXX C here. So keep an eye out for these 3 decks. I think they're better than they look in the OCG. I also was going to include Infernoid on here, but now Infernoid's performing like the 4th best deck in the OCG, so I don't think that's a fair one at all. But but it was struggling a little bit before, but I think that was part of a learning curve. People are learning a better way to play that deck, but still exciting nonetheless. So really cool, really excited for these decks to come out, and they're also, hopefully they're not that far away. I know that this one's not far away because it's like less than a month now, but hopefully these aren't too far either. That would be really cool to get those soon. And just something to keep in mind at all times, honestly. Like, yes, I can do a video like this right now, but like, it's just something that you should always keep in mind if you constantly check Road to the King to kind of see what future formats are kind of looking like, potentially. So just keep that in mind. Other than that, I'm out of here for tonight. Thank you so much for watching as always. Keeping an eye out for news. Not much stuff this week other than like the really good quick play spell that came out yesterday. I'll keep you updated with any news. We didn't get much stuff this week, so I'm guessing next week will be a little bit heavier and actually get some like legacy support and stuff. But obviously I'll bring you any of that as it drops. I'll see you later. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Peace.